Okay, very good morning to you if you're in the Caribbean or the Americas. Good afternoon if you're in Europe and the Middle East. And a very good evening to you if you are tuning in from the Asia Pacific region. A warm welcome to today's Crossing Borders, the IMC streaming service created to keep investment migration professionals like yourselves connected and informed about all things investment migration related. If you haven't seen one of these broadcasts before, don't worry, you can catch up through our YouTube channel, and don't forget to hit the like, share and subscribe button. Today we'll be discussing the rise of the regional citizen. You can ask questions using the widget on the right-hand side of your screen, where you'll also find some useful handouts about investment migration and the Investment Migration Council. And to keep you engaged, as ever, we'll have a little bit of polling too. So to test this out, we're going to launch a poll right now and simply ask you guys, where are you watching from today? So we'll give you 5 seconds or stop. Typically we stop at an 80% response rate. Okay. So I'm going to shut that down and share those results with you. So overwhelmingly 91% from Europe and Africa and 9% from the Americas. So let me enlarge, try and share my screen again, close this off. Here we go. All right, brilliant. Stop showing the application. Sorry, I've got a small issue here. Okay, wanted to get us back on the screen. All right, there's a short video at the end about how you can get qualified using the Investment Migration Council's education and training framework. So do stay with us until the end of today's broadcast. But let's get started then. So what we know is COVID-19 will transform investment migration and accelerate the already existing trend of regionalisation on a scale never seen before. Or do we? Well, that's according to my guest today, prize-winning author and writer, Professor Kristin Surak from the London School of Economics and author of the forthcoming book, Citizenship for Sale, and more on that publication, on that book, a little bit later. Good afternoon, Professor Surak, and welcome to Crossing Borders.
Thanks very much for having me here, Bruno.
Brilliant. Glad you can hear me and see me. Kristin, I want to kick off straight away with some questions. The pandemic has challenged international mobility like no other event that's happened in the past. What observations about investment migration can you make in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, please?
Well, looking at the impact of the pandemic, one of the things that it really brought home, I think, for a lot of people in the world is the extent to which mobility cannot be taken for granted. You know, we used to, 100 years ago, we lived in a world of much stronger borders, and it was even much more difficult for people to get outside of their countries in the first place. And in many places in the world, even through the Cold War, it was difficult for many people to get out. But all of that has been relaxing. It's been expanding. Countries have been become much more progressive with this in general. But I think COVID-19 has highlighted the extent to which we can't take that for granted. It's not necessarily a one-way street with that. Now, of course, anybody who's familiar with the investment migration field will know that within global mobility, there's still very huge hierarchies, and that where the country you're a citizen of can either greatly facilitate cross-border movement, like if you're from Japan, you can enter a country with a visa on arrival or visa-free, to nearly every country in the world. Much different if you're from Afghanistan or Pakistan or a place like that. But I think the COVID-19 pandemic has hit home to a lot more people that you can't take it for granted. So if you take, for example, Americans, they used to have pretty good visa-free access, but now I think at the moment they can get visa-free access to only about 75 countries. If you're from a place like, say, Russia, and I'm not exactly sure what the regulations are at the moment, but I do know for a period they weren't allowing citizens out. They were making it very, very difficult, unless you were a dual national, to actually leave the country. And Australia, for example, has made it de facto, if not de jure, very difficult to enter and leave the country as well. So the pandemic has, I think, revised a lot of basic assumptions about global mobility that many people in the investment migration industry, or just more broadly, we're thinking about in terms of where you can move to and what investment migration facilitates. If we think then about the impact in terms of, if we think about investment migration as obviously both citizenship by investment programs and residence by investment programs, the impact of COVID-19 has been, I think, a little different on both sides of both angles of what the industry addresses. So with citizenship, some of the Caribbean programs were famously in demand very often for the visa-free access, particularly to Schengen countries that they offered. And in comparison to, say, residence by investment in a place like Portugal, for example, the cost would be a bit more, but it's much more about what you're getting within Portugal, rather than, say, mobility wasn't necessarily the number one motive for people in those cases. One of the things that's been interesting about COVID-19 is that I think it's recast some of those mobility relationships, but in comparing the two offerings. So, for example, if you're from a Caribbean country, and on top of this, I must say this all with the brackets that this is an ever-changing field of what sovereign states will allow in terms of entering or exiting the country. I'm in the UK at the moment, and currently, if you cannot return to the UK from any one of 33 countries unless you're a resident or a citizen. And if you try to hide the fact you've been in any of those 33 countries, the government is threatening you with jail. And this is, just in the past week or so, it's become much more stringent. So all of this is with the caveats that it's an ever-changing situation. But what it's meant is that the easy mobility to Europe that the Caribbean offerings were once quite desirable for can no longer be as taken for granted as it has been in the past. So, but yet by contrast, we've seen, especially among wealthy liberal democratic countries, that they've been treating citizens and residents as the same. So that means that, for example, if you're a resident of Portugal this past summer, you could have easily flown into Portugal. They would have accepted you, had you been able to get a flight, you could have gone into the country because you have residence in the country. Whereas if you had citizenship in St. Kitts, that wouldn't have been a possibility is over the summer. During certain periods, all of this, of course, potentially changing. So because countries are treating, especially wealthy countries, people with resident status similarly as they would in terms of citizens, in allowing them to return, sometimes facilitating that return as well. It's meant that residence by investments programs have opened doors in a way that citizenship programs in the past could have, but are unable to do so because countries have re-erected those boundaries. So I think it creates some interesting twists in terms of some of the assumptions and some of the reasons why people were looking at particular options compared to, say, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago.
Right. Look, How is this, in your opinion, affecting the attractiveness of residency by investment programs and citizenship by investment programs, essentially?
I think it's a complicated mix. It's still one of those questions that it still depends a lot on the person's situation. In general, the motives I've found in my research, based on lots of interviews with both people working in the investment migration industry as well as clients of these people who are going for citizenship by investment and residence by investment themselves. And when I did most of the interviews before COVID, one of the main reasons was mobility, and that would be mobility in the present, cross-border mobility,
yeah,
or mobility in the future as an insurance policy or a sort of plan B. And I think those calculations for both have shifted quite a bit. So people who, as I mentioned before, the mobility concerns have shifted, but the insurance, the quote unquote plan B insurance policy side of things has shifted as well. Previously, there was a lot more, in a sense, short-term thinking, or using, thinking of options as in more of a hypothetical situation. If something goes on, I'd like an exit option, or I'll have this and visit, this place, 1 or 2 weeks a year, perhaps, or so. But I think now people are thinking, as borders become much stronger, much higher these days, are thinking about, where would I want to spend half a year or a year in quarantine? Where would I want to spend a more extensive length of time? And that means also looking at the infrastructures of various countries in a different way than before. So questions, something like healthcare, people would have asked about before, but that wouldn't have been a very decisive factor. But now, something like healthcare, what are the healthcare facilities, has become much more of a question of interest than it would have in the past. And I think here an important caveat as well, there's an important caveat to mention too, in that, especially with residence by investment programs, there's often a presumption, or find some arguments that people are looking for, are kind of welfare benefit shopping. That they're, potentially going to be investors, becomes a drain on the national healthcare system. Yeah. When in reality, that's actually much rarer, in part because in residence by investment programs, it's almost, a requirement. Almost all countries will say you have to have private health insurance. So it means that when people are looking at healthcare options, they're really looking at the private health insurance world and the top end things that they can afford, in terms of what they can get as well. So I think there's been a lot more medium-term thinking as people are making their decisions. And I think this links into the regional aspect, perhaps, too.
All right. So before we narrow down into that, we'll focus a little bit on the clients as well. But I want to remind the viewers that if you do have any questions or comments, please use the widget, which is on the left of your screen, and ask any question you have to Professor Surak. Okay, Professor Surak, we've seen, looking at client profiles in recent years, increasing numbers of affluent people that have developed an interest in investment migration as a variety and availability, as well as pricing, which has become far more mainstream than it was even 6-7 years ago. Do you believe the pandemic is changing the typical client's profile that agents and governments are seeing, from your perspective with the research that you've done?
This is a very interesting question, and it's one where, I'm often sort of lamenting the fact that the data available on these programs are not more detailed. And I think this is an area where it would be fantastic to have a survey. Very difficult, of course, to implement, but it'd be very interesting to see how these sorts of things are changing. But based on interviews, and as well as some of the quantitative data looking at global wealth distributions and changes in global wealth, one can note that the pandemic has, not surprisingly, exacerbated global inequalities, global wealth inequalities in some ways, and that the very wealthy, the ultra high net worths, the high net worth individuals with assets of say more than 10 million or so, are doing pretty well out of the pandemic. They've got safety mechanisms and all of that. So in terms of that segment of people who might be interested, they haven't been hit, and if they haven't been thinking about this before, they might be thinking about this now, just to make sure that they have as many options as they can possibly have. And this is something that of course very wealthy people often think about, but also much less wealthy people often think about maximizing their options. They just don't have the resources to do that as well. Looking though at a slightly at a sort of mass affluent segment, say between 1 million to 5 million in liquid assets, they've been hit much more by the pandemic because they're often entrepreneurs with businesses, growing businesses, but businesses that have been hit because of impacts on the supply chains, impacts in demand chains. And so I think here we can see some countervailing trends. One is that people are much more aware of the importance of maximizing these options and what options are out there. But at the same time, they might not have the expendable resources at the moment to make the most of these sorts of programs. So I think in terms of looking at what this means in the demand for programs as well, we'll see a bit of a lag as bureaucracies going online may not as efficiently be able to go online, as travel bans make it difficult to give biometric information and these sorts of things. But also because of the slowdown in the global economy, it could be another 3, 4, 5 years, but before a group of mass affluent are able to actually afford this. Although this will remain in the back of their head, they'll be aware of this as a potential, what would be for them a solution to a set of problems or issues that that's out of their control, but nonetheless would like to, in a sense, control the risk of.
Okay, staying on the subject of course, the pandemic, how, in your opinion, do you think COVID-19 will reshape the market from the supply side, and will we see new countries entering and creating either golden visa or golden passports, CBI, RBI programs?
Yeah, I think the supply side question is very interesting too. Obviously, Cyprus has put its program on hold, and it's even said that it's not going to relaunch it. Malta is reformulating its policy in terms of a new direction. So there's been a little bit of change in in terms of, say, the traditional countries of investment migration as well. But of course, this as a potential source of revenue for a country, it's pretty easy. It's fairly low costs to attract substantial amounts of foreign direct investment, or what could be seen as foreign direct investment. And for a small economy, this can be quite substantial as well. So if I think about, I've been doing some economic research actually on the European residence by investment programs, and if you look at it as a proportion of foreign direct investment, I think in Latvia, as well as possibly Portugal, I don't remember quite offhand, it's a substantial proportion of foreign direct investment. And then you can ask what proportion of foreign direct investment is contributing to the economy as well. And so it's very interesting to see what the possibilities are for bringing in money into economies that, globally, the global recession outside of China, pretty much, is hitting a lot of places very hard, and they're feeling it. Especially places where tourism has been the lifeline of the country. So thinking a lot about island microstates, they've been very, very hard hit, and they would be, and this is, such an easy way to bring in other forms of revenue, especially when tourism is taking such a big hit. And so there's always been a lot of, there's always talk about potential new countries coming in as well. And I think what's important to flag here is that a lot of them are not in the quote unquote global north. So there's a lot of interesting possibilities, I think, in the global south, where we also see a lot of demand as well. So the biggest country of demand for citizenship by investment right now is Turkey. And in terms of residence by investment, Malaysia has been doing as many people as all of the EU residence by investment programs annually. So these are really big programs, and they go off, they stay off the radar of a lot of people who are only looking at the global north as well. So I think we see strong programs in the global south. They're likely to grow there as well. If we look at the global north, I think we might see, because there's been so much pressure coming out of the European Commission and European Parliament, we might see countries shifting more towards entrepreneurial style programs, ones that are looking not just for a passive investment in real estate. And there are also, I've been looking at the numbers on this, if real estate is an investment option, 90% or more people go for it. And that becomes less popular among the general populace, even if there's almost no impact on the national real estate market. So I've been looking at that as well. And it's really only in Greece where this has had an impact on the national real estate market. Otherwise, maybe in terms of neighborhoods or specific cities, you'd have to show that. But the numbers in real estate are very small, but people always go for real estate. But I think what countries might be doing in the face of this pressure is shifting away from more passive investments, especially in real estate, to more entrepreneurial schemes that are looking for also the attraction of skills, or at least a CV that proves a certain skill set, while spreading, while going for these programs in greater force, because, as we've been saying before, that, as I was saying before, it is a fairly low-cost way to bring in revenue, especially in an economy in contraction.
Yeah. So how will these pathways, these investment migration pathways, need to respond to these changing dynamics then?
So the pathway, you mean in terms of the programs themselves?
Yeah, the programs themselves. The clients are, there's a shifting client profile, which you've mentioned already. You've got these traditional classic, the Caribbean programs that have been around for, quite some time now. They've matured quite nicely as well. More often than not, they're on passive investments. Real estate has been incredibly popular in the past. We know that we're seeing some shift. Portugal made some shifts, but how generally do these, does investment migration need to respond to, these shifting dynamics as such?
That's a good question, because there's a lot of shifting dynamics. Big question as well.
Yeah.
I'd say in general, and I guess, and I don't know how naive I am in saying this. For years we've been watching this race to the bottom in terms of price, and even saying that is controversial as well. But we have seen countries bring their price down, and then other countries do this in response. And I think in general, especially given the realization that more people have, number one, that these programs are there, that they operate fairly smoothly, but also the post-COVID world where people are going to be much more risk adverse when it comes to securing mobility or making sure that they have mobility options. That we could, especially in the Caribbean, where this as a form of income is really important in the wake of the travel bans and the impact on the tourism industry, maybe keeping the prices the same or raising them in a coordinated effort, simply because demand is continuing. And so there's no reason to try to undercut the competitors, but to try to, bring in more revenue if possible, because the country needs it now. So I would say that, countries should think about keeping, maybe even raising their prices. I know it's not a very popular thing to say, to people in business. They're thinking, from a business angle. But I think that would be quite important.
Perhaps a little bit more coordination as well between certain countries. We know that, the 5 programs in the Caribbean, very similar programs, very similar pricing as well. And more often than not, when you do travel, if you're in Asia, people confuse one island to the next and one program to the next. They kind of see it as that's the Caribbean and that's the European Union. So maybe a little bit of price harmonization in the Caribbean with the Caribbean nations working together could actually be a good thing in the long run. Unless perhaps a little bit less confusion for the markets. Looking to the future a little bit, how do you believe the sector will develop in the coming years? And then I want to talk about your book.
Okay. Yeah, social scientists aren't very good at future predictions. They're much better looking at the past and saying, oh yeah, it was supposed to be that way. So thinking about the future is a little bit challenging. I think we'll see a greater demand for places as places. People thinking much more in the medium term of where they want to stay. I forgot to mention this before. One of the interesting things I found in some of the quantitative studies I've been doing is that investor migrants in Europe look like tourists. If they're not long-term thinkers. In fact, the closest sort of figure they resemble is a tourist. They're looking for the same things in a country that a tourist would. But I think that's shifting now, where they're looking much more at healthcare, schools, in a much more real, concrete way than they would have in the past. Do I want to live in this place for 6 months? Are there the facilities around for me to continue on with the sort of lifestyle that I've become accustomed to in this place as well? And so I think that means that wealthy countries, traditional countries of immigration, so US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, will do pretty well, also because of the role of global English is still quite important. European RBIs will do pretty well out of this. But I think also in terms of the pandemic, there's been such a regional difference in the way that countries have handled this and the way that mobility has become cordoned off and segmented. So this is where I suppose one can connect to the idea of the regional citizen, where if you're in the U.S. and you're looking to get out, getting to Europe is pretty hard, but getting to the Caribbean is a lot easier. So people will be looking more at what's available in their region, in their time zone, even as they're working from home or working from their second home, which could be in a tropical place with better weather. But that's where I think the regional connections, if you're looking for a second home place where you want to spend several weeks or several months a year, the proximity to your main base is going to matter in a way that it didn't before. So I think we might see a greater regionalization coming out of this, out of the pandemic as well.
Interesting, great. Tell us about your new book, Citizenship for Sale and Millionaires. When is it coming out? What is it about?
So this is the culmination of several years of research that I've been looking at this field. I've been very interested in. When I first came across it, I'd read about it in newspapers, but when I discovered that there's this whole market around it, I became quite fascinated about how it's constructed. And so I've had the opportunity to travel to a lot of places back in the pre-COVID world and talk to a lot of people to kind of understand the market dynamics, so supply, demand, and the role of intermediaries in creating this into a market. And so the book itself sort of unpacks that, kind of describes what's going on with this, looking at in a sense, those 3 angles: supply, demand, and the making of the market through an international structure of intermediaries. And I think for a lot of people who are not as familiar with this as a domain, it will hopefully sort of unpacks some assumptions that people have going into it. I think especially in the West, the idea of selling citizenship, people can think, oh, this is a sacred thing, how can you possibly do this? But when you think about it much more globally, you do, and you talk to people as well, about the differences in citizenship. You see, massive global inequalities in this. I taught a class yesterday on citizenship, and what the student presenter started off her presentation with basically saying, hi, I'm from Pakistan, and let me tell you how bad my citizenship is and how hard it is for me, how hard it was for me to study in the UK, and how few options I have after this. And so it's interesting when you start seeing, especially for people in the global north, to get outside of those assumptions and understand how this works. I think the other thing that's important too is so many people think of citizenship as the rights you get within a state. Whereas when you look at it in terms of citizenship by investment or residence by investment, it's about the rights that citizenship gets you outside of a state in third countries. And that brings in important geopolitical aspects as well, because the value of citizenship is controlled not by the sovereign issuing the citizenship, but often by third countries as well. And I find that as a social scientist, looking at the geopolitics of the market and how shifting geopolitics shapes and crafts the fields in different ways. We have countries with differential power operating around this sort of thing. And so those are sort of the key themes of the study, as well as, I've been trying to do some, working with the quantitative numbers as much as I've been able to collect in order to describe, as accurately statistically about, what are the dynamics of the field and how it's operating. So I've been, weighed down by teaching. The book will hopefully be done by the end of the year. It's under contract with Harvard University Press.
Okay. So we're looking at end of 2021 for publication. Hopefully, if all goes well. Okay. On this slightly different subject, I'm going to launch a poll now, and we want to ask the viewers today, in their opinion, which countries will see the greatest new growth in demands for CBI or RBI options among their citizens. So again, please get voting. We'll give you about 5 seconds and we'll stop at 80%. So the choices are China, the USA, Nigeria, Vietnam, or Brazil. Okay, we're still 70% of votes. I can see the votes are coming in. All right, so let's close that and share the results on the screen. Kristin, Surak, can you see the results?
Yep.
So 45% overwhelmingly think the growth in demand for CBI and RBI programs will come from China, followed by Nigeria and Vietnam, and equal weighing between the US and Brazil. Anything jump out at you there, Kristin, Surak?
I find it interesting. I mean, here it's very hard for me to predict, but notably the question asks for greatest new growth. So obviously China is a big part of the demand side at the moment, but because the question asks for, in a sense, the percentage of growth, it's interesting that most people think China is still going to outstrip these other countries. My guess would be, I mean, the US, we've seen extensive growth, because it's interesting because in a sense, the way people are answering, it's saying that COVID doesn't matter that much, because the US and Brazil, which have been hard hit by COVID, came in towards the end. I would guess a place like Nigeria. I mean, a lot of growth seems to be coming from Africa right now. Right. Vietnam may have already peaked. I'm a little bit less familiar with that case, but it's interesting that people, think China will continue to dominate exponentially almost.
Interesting. Let me hide that. And another poll that we have, and I'm going to launch this again, keep everybody entertained and engaged. Which programs will see the greatest demand in 2021? So 4 answers, multiple choice there. And the first is RBI programs in Europe, RBI programs in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, or RBI programs elsewhere, or actually not even RBI programs, but CBI programs. So please get voting. Everybody's very quick on the mouse button for this one. All right, let's close that and share the results. So remember, the question was, in your opinion, which programs will see the greatest demand in 2021? And your answers, 38% with RBI programs in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, fairly closely followed by European RBI programs, then RBI programs elsewhere coming in third place, and then with 8% is CBI programs. Kristin, Surak, your thoughts on those results?
Yeah, again, very interesting. It's the categories are there in a sense to gauge the way that thinking about mobility may have shifted after COVID. And it's interesting that it seems that people think that it will definitely be going to these traditional countries of immigration, where English is the norm. There's an immigration history to the country. There's sort of places where you'd want to spend, and often think of spending longer periods of time, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, followed then by Europe as well, where you also get a high quality of life, possibilities of English language, high quality English language education, high quality healthcare systems, and those sorts of things as well. Followed by RBI programs elsewhere, but also, at somewhat similar rates. So the IBI programs elsewhere kind of speaks to what I was saying before about potential regionalization, looking at offerings in the global south, where we see many more south-south connections emerging out of the COVID world. It's interesting that CBI programs are predicted to be so low. And I wonder, in a way, thinking about the traditional Caribbean and your EU offerings, I think what's been so striking to me is what's been going on with Turkey, where Turkey is outstripping, all other CBI programs in terms of naturalizations by far. Of course, it's easier to get residence than citizenship, so naturalization is going to be less anyways. But I do wonder whether Turkey will continue to see, such great demand as it has in 2019, 2020, whether this will continue with its program.
Yeah. So we looked with that one principally on IBI programs. We've got the similar poll now, but focused more on the CBI programs. So let's launch that, and we're asking, in your opinion, which programs will see the greatest demand in 2021. Again, multiple choice, 4 possible options. And here it's CBI programs in the Caribbean, CBI programs in Europe, CBI programs elsewhere, or actually none of the above, and RBI programs will see the greatest demand. So let's see if those 8% from that answered before will now answer this question. So we'll give you a few more seconds. I'd like to get to the 80% of voters. Close that and share those results. Okay.
Interesting.
So, majority think European CBI programs, followed by Caribbean and elsewhere. But overwhelmingly, the RBI programs will see the greatest growth. Yeah, it's
interesting. I think it's not too surprising, given that RBI programs are generally, there's less at stake, they're easier to do, the process can be a lot faster. So in a sense, that makes sense. And so as I was saying, in terms of mobility options, if you're going for a medium-term place, the RBI programs can secure that in a way that the CBI programs no longer do that. It's interesting that this seems to be, the CBI programs in Europe seems to be a big vote for Malta's new offering. That seems to be a very popular option. I'm surprised though that people don't, looking at, say, Turkey, which does have enormous demand. that people are not thinking in those terms for 2021, but who knows?
Yeah, perhaps next time we'll ask a question and we'll put Turkey separately and see what responses we have. It's one we at the IMC are getting an increasing interest from Turkish professionals actually looking to join the IMC and wishing to find out a little bit more about the industry. So I think there are more players as well that are participating in the Turkish program than there were even 24 months ago. So it is one to be watched. Kristin, Surak, we are running out of time. It's been a pleasure and an honor. I know you're incredibly busy with your teaching schedule at the LSE at the moment, albeit I think everything is, of course, remotely done online, and all your students are also at home. For the viewers watching us from all over the world, I hope you found this interview, this chat with Professor Surak interesting. If you want to read up further on the rise of the regional citizen, I invite you to please refer to the latest investment migration yearbook, which the IMC published a few months ago. It's available free for download from our website. But if you send my team, the IMC Secretariat, an email, we'll happily send one, a hard copy in the post for you. And with that, reminder, if you're not already a member of the IMC, please visit our website, investmentmigration.org, for information on joining and supporting our work, and of course for daily updates on what's happening in the industry right now. We'll be back on the 24th of March, always at 2:30 Central European Time. We've launched a brand new program for crossing borders for 2021 with lots of exciting new guests, keeping us up to date with analysis on the current affairs, and also trying to look beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. So until we see you again on the 24th of March, stay safe, and many thanks for joining us, and very good afternoon to you in London, Kristin, Surak.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Introducing the Certification in Investment Migration from the Investment Migration Council, the first structured learning product of its kind globally, designed for you. Explore the bite-sized learning pathway of each module on our custom online platform. You can track your progress as you go and learn at a pace that suits you, with an estimated 5 hours of study time per module. The Certification in Investment Migration contributes to the development of professional competencies and standards for those new to or already working in the industry. So, what are you waiting for? Visit our website to start your learning journey today.